Good evening. Today is August 16th, 2023. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined, as always, by Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford. How are you, Nigel?
Good to be here.
We've also got Western Standard senior Alberta columnist Corey Morgan. You had a good show earlier today, eh?
I did. Yeah, Dan McTeague on there. He's always a good conversation to have.
He is. All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about, I think it's not a new thing, but it's flaring up to new levels. The war between Ottawa and the West over energy and electricity. Ottawa trying to force its way into provincial control over the electricity grid in a very aggressive way. And Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe hitting back hard. Also, sort of an exclusive scoop from the Western Standard. Rachel, a senior source in the NDP in Alberta, says Rachel Notley will be retiring this fall as leader of her party, making way for an interim leader to oversee the leadership election. So we're gonna talk about Rachel Notley's pending, maybe, retirement, and Ottawa's ban on usable compostable bags. Those of you outside of Alberta might not know what I'm talking about. You know, Ottawa's banning single-use plastic bags coming this December. In Alberta, at Safeway and some other places, we get these nice plastic. They feel like plastic. They're almost as good as plastic, but they're completely compostable. 9, says Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. He says there shall not be compostable bags that are usable, that are enjoyable to use at the grocery store. We're going to ban them verboten. So we're going to talk about that. Before we get into it, though, as usual, got to thank my favorite sponsor, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Canadian Sporting Association is Canada's leading firearms right advocacy group in Canada. They are on the front lines, making sure, standing up for firearms owners in Canada, that you can still buy, safely and responsibly use firearms in Canada. Without the CSSA, the federal government would have taken the last of they'd be leaving us with nothing but BB guns and kids' bows and arrows by this point without the CSSA, because it's so important for gun owners to stand together. So if you're not yet a member of the CSSA, go to cssa-cila.org or do what I do, just Google them and become a member today. Actually, while you're at it, since the federal government has been in the business of getting media censored off of Facebook and Google, it's a lot harder for a lot of you to get a hold of our news content. Make sure you go to westernstandard.news. At the very least, sign up for our free newsletter. You'll get a blast of our headlines in the morning with all the top stories. But you'll be limited to 5 ones for free. After that, you got to become a member. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year to support the West's leading independent media organization. All right, let's get into it. So it's been coming for some time. It actually kind of popped up during the Alberta election in May. Rachel Notley saying she is going to she's going to green the electricity grid by 2035, net zero, no more carbon, et cetera, et cetera. There was a big blow up over that because it was so expensive. And that was a fairly big moment that turned out many Albertans, at least, against the NDP. Albertans looked at the price tag on that and said, no, we're not doing that. That's pretty crazy for Alberta. But Ottawa, which has very little, Alberta has very little impact on the decisions of Ottawa, says we're going 2035, and the provinces, you have to come along with it. Well, enter Danielle Smith and Scott Moe, and they hold up this little document called the Constitution. It says, well, energy is under exclusive provincial jurisdiction. Now, we've heard that before, and it hasn't stopped Ottawa from butting its way in, and the Liberal-packed Supreme Court generally does its duty, lays back and think of England, and does what the federal government says. But we've got a big war now brewing over this. Danielle Smith saying intimating that she might even invoke the the Sovereignty Act over this. That Alberta will just, if it has to, will go completely alone, pull out of any federal regulatory regime around the electricity grid. But it's blowing up pretty big. Naturally, I know you had a column on this, I think just yesterday.
Yep.
And I don't know. How strong is Alberta's hand in this? Because at the end of the day, the Supreme Court's probably just going to do Ottawa's bidding.
Well, first of all, you're correct that the Supreme Court will almost certainly do the government's bidding, not because they will be told to, but because they just know what the right thing to do is. All these people have been appointed by the federal government, and they're not going to upset the apple cart. I asked Danielle Smith at her press conference what legally could be done.
This was yesterday.
Her answer was, we will see. It is uncharted territory. Strictly speaking, when she produced Section 92 of the Constitution, she clearly anticipated the question and said, right, well, I just happen to have it right here. And it says it's a provincial responsibility. In fact, it says development, conservation, and management.
Sit here, read the Constitution.
I'm gonna read the Constitution to you.
Bear with us, folks.
For the generation and production of electrical energy, that is a provincial thing. How will the courts get around it? They will probably buy the Guilbeault argument that because carbon dioxide is pollution and the federal government has appropriated pollution to itself as an area of interest, well, then that overrides the Constitution. Now, obviously, arguing that carbon dioxide is pollution is just a trick. It is plant food. We would die without carbon dioxide. Plants would die. Plants produce oxygen. Anybody who's done grade 10 biology knows that carbon dioxide is not pollution. But watch the Supreme Court convince themselves that it is, because the federal government says so.
Corey, I think will go as Nigel was hinting there, to the carbon tax decision, where it says, yes, well, energy and whatnot is provincial, but the federal government has a right to regulate for pollution as it would go across provincial boundaries. And global warming is a global issue. And at the time, we all saw that was a hole blown through the Constitution you could drive a truck through. Trojan horse, use your metaphor as you see fit. But I would expect that is what Ottawa is banking on, that Supreme Court decision, completely upending decades of constitutional precedent, allowing the federal government directly into energy. Would you expect that's probably where the federal government's going to go now, that because it's global warming, anything you could possibly connect to global warming is therefore under federal control? And I can't think of very much now that the federal government doesn't say is global warming.
Yeah, I don't see any other way they would rule on this. So it's an exercise in futility. At best, it's foot dragging to go through the court system. But you got to go through the motions. You got to use the legal tools at your disposal. So I mean, as I said earlier, it's like a slow motion battle, though it's going to be heated, because it's going to take a while to get to that point, though, of a Supreme Court ruling. We might not have the same government in power by the time that happens. Mm-hmm. So I mean, some of the tactic on the part of Premier Smith could be just, if we can drag this out, we'll have somebody more receptive in power by the time the courts ever actually rule on this. But there's not going to be any legal recourse for the province within the existing structures to counter this. This is a standoff, and I where I'd want to go with it, but I don't anticipate Premier Smith going that way.
Well, Premier Smith has pretty much said she will refuse to go along. She even said Guilbeault can pound sand, which I'm not sure if that was a play on words with oil sands, but if so, I mean, all the better. But refuse. Let's talk about what would refusing look like. Because even if the federal government, if the Supreme Court were to rule that Ottawa has the power to regulate Alberta's provincial energy grid, which is just bizarre saying out loud, but I have very little faith the Supreme Court would rule in anything other than further centralized federal power. They can't physically make Alberta, I suppose maybe they could force Alberta to shut down its energy production, natural gas, oil, things like that, but they can't force us to start building solar panels and windmills or wind generator turbines over farmers' fields. They can't really force us to do it. they might agree that Ottawa has a right to tell us what to do, but they can't really make us do anything, Nigel.
No, they can't force us to do that, but they can force the closure of the natural gas plants that we have. And then we're stuck with the problem of, well, what do we do now? We don't want the lights to go off. We don't want the heat to fail. We need power. And that opens, it's a question of timing as much as anything else. By 2035, can you imagine that anybody, even if they made the decision today, could get a nuclear plant built in 12 years? The permits, the environmental impact studies, the deliberately intense considerations, it really isn't possible. So this is the real danger here, that we could find ourselves, after decades of energy security, facing life with brownouts, even blackouts. Very dangerous in a prairie province where temperatures fall and we have more hours of darkness than daylight. This is what Smith is so very, very adamant about, is that we have energy security is actually the most important thing.
Corey, it's bizarre that Alberta, the most energy-rich jurisdiction in all of the Western Hemisphere, except for possibly Venezuela, which doesn't manage to do very well with it. Actually, yeah, no, let's say the two most energy-rich jurisdictions in North and South America will become possibly the two biggest energy basket cases. That Alberta, with third largest proven oil reserves on the planet, we could be facing brownouts and blackouts by 2035 if this happens. There's just no way we could do it. And even if we wanted to, we tried really aggressively to do it, and we were willing to spend hundreds of billions of dollars that are projected to be required to do this in that time, still probably wouldn't be able to do it. It's just bizarre that we're exporting oil for energy, but we just wouldn't even be able to keep the lights on right here. The office towers headquartering energy companies wouldn't have energy.
Well, we have a bizarre, ideological, and unreasonable environment minister. I mean, he is probably the most, extreme-leaning person we've ever seen in that position. I think he's very well aware that we can't do it. I mean, the numbers are very easy to find when you start looking. Alberta has 80% of its generation is based on fossil fuels right now. Even if wholeheartedly Premier Smith wanted to pursue that transition that he's demanding, it would be impossible. As Nigel said, we couldn't get the nuke plants fast enough. We couldn't get the other sources of energy. And when the political play comes into it, this isn't a big burden for Ontario and Quebec. They've got all sorts of hydroelectric and nuclear power. So this is the usual East versus West. And we'll get painted as the intransigent boogeymen who have messed up Canada's environmental policy. I don't think they care that we're going to have brownouts and blackouts.
So what's really ironic here, Derek, is that you said earlier, and you were correct, that when it becomes a matter of pollution, well, this suddenly borders don't matter. We've got to look after it because it's all one. They don't use that logic when they say, oh, no, you can't, if you export natural gas to a country that it will then retire or not build coal electrical generation. Oh, it's not a global issue then. Oh no, we've got to do it right here in this country, get our own down. So much of this could be solved if, by exporting natural gas, Alberta was able to build up the carbon credits to satisfy the demands of a net zero carbon policy.
Surely you're not suggesting that the eco-fanatics might be a bit hypocritical.
I am suggesting that there may be more going on here than just
So there's an interesting bright side here. There's not much of a carrot offered to Alberta, but now they're trying a stick. Guilbeault has threatened that if Alberta doesn't fall in line and do what we say, we're going to withdraw the green subsidies from Alberta. We're going to stop federal subsidies to wind turbine generators and solar panels, building stuff like that. To which Alberta should say, okay, we don't want them for the most part. Like the voters in Alberta who generally really want this stuff, they live in downtown cores, and they don't have to live with wind turbines on top of the roofs of their high rises. They don't have to look out and see their previously pristine country landscape polluted by solar panels for mile after mile after mile. Alberta just put a moratorium on this stuff for 6 months, and Ottawa's response is to say, we'll just give you less money to build things that you don't really want anyway. It's bizarre. Corey, is that supposed to be a carrot or a stick, or like what's the reasoning? I'm not seeing how that's a threat that we care about.
Well, it will put pressure on because, I mean, the opposition here will say, look at the jobs lost because of the intransigent, look at the money being thrown away. I mean, they love doing that when Ottawa dangles our own money at us. If a provincial or even municipal government turns their back on it, people act as if, well, that means the money's been thrown into a pot and burned or something. It's just not been used, so it doesn't exist. So that will put pressure on the government. As you said, it's city people who don't realize the impact of that, but they will still be speaking up. But it starts the stage. I mean, if it gets really bad, if this battle really starts happening, if the premier is really saying she's not going to comply, that's when I can see the government starting to reduce other transfers. They've always used that as a means to punish Alberta. When they don't like our healthcare policies, they cut our healthcare transfers. We have this system where our money is taxed. It goes to Ottawa, and they pick and choose how much we're going to get back for specific programs. They have a lot of leverage on us. And I think that transfer for the green energy could just be the first one if they really want to start putting the screws to us, and it could get pretty ugly.
Nigel, I'm not sure if they'd touch, like they are clawing back health transfers already a little bit because a few dozen people in Alberta dare pay out of their own pocket for healthcare, but they can't really tie the two together. The Canada Health Act says like under what circumstances they can claw back, and it's stupid that exists to begin with. But I don't think they can really go after the health and social transfers on this. But they can withdraw the green subsidies if we don't comply. Again, is that a serious threat? Like, why should Albertans care if Ottawa stops giving us back some of our money to build solar panels?
If you're going to put a moratorium on development for these things, probably not, at least not for the 6 months. But if there was any appetite to actually settle as opposed to just grind Alberta, then this business of allowing carbon credits for natural gas that's exported to be credited against Alberta's carbon dioxide emissions, that is the door that could be opened.
So, Corey, you talked about Smith thinking maybe she could just wait out Trudeau and Guilbeault. Poilievre government, I think, would be highly unlikely to, first of all, want to impose this to begin with, and also, second, to so nakedly intrude into what is, at least according to the Constitution, crystal clear provincial jurisdiction, regardless of how Trudeau's Supreme Court might rule. What's the danger of waiting out? Because a lot of times, bureaucrats will try to wait out a minister they don't like, or provinces wait out feds they don't like. I mean,
it's the investment chill. I mean, who's going to build a gas-fired plant? Alberta's got the only deregulated industry in Canada, actually, with private operators building that infrastructure and putting into the grid. And those have lives. We need to keep building new ones and turning them over. But when it's in the air, I mean, part of Guilbeault's policy talked about what we will allow the plant eventually to generate as like a backup for 420 hours a year or something. Like nobody's going to invest in that. And when everything's in limbo, if it's in limbo for 2 years, those companies aren't going to be committing those dollars to that sort of generation infrastructure. So not only would the solar and wind not be getting built, I suspect gas-fired plants and other conventional energy projects are all kind of being on hold as well. And that could leave us with a real bad energy deficit.
Maybe let's talk about the political danger of trying to wait out Trudeau and Guilbeault. There's no guarantee that Pierre Poilievre is going to be prime minister in 2 years. We've had several, Jason Kenney tried to wait out Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau waited out him. Although I think he got something more difficult even than Kenney was for him. But the idea of waiting out the federal government, sometimes it works out, but it hasn't worked for quite a while so far. What would be the political danger in Smith just trying to wait Trudeau out on this? That maybe we just get further behind the 8 ball if Trudeau manages to hang on to power?
Well, it would be the political risk is exactly what you just said. If he manages to win the next election, there goes that strategy. But there's actually a further political risk, even if Mr. Oliver wins, and that is this policy is very popular in Alberta, but it's not very popular back in Eastern Canada. They don't particularly care about our energy needs, and they don't particularly like oil. It would seem they all drive cars, but they don't particularly like like oil, and they've got nuclear, so they can afford to be very holier than thou about it. So
True, but
what will Pierre have to give away in Quebec to get elected?
perhaps, but Trudeau has nothing to lose by angering Albertans.
That is also true.
There's virtually nothing to lose. He's got like what, two seats?
Two seats, none in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, 2 seats in Alberta, 0 in Saskatchewan, and the 2 seats they have are very urban. Not even very center in Alberta. They're on the left side. Trudeau has nothing to lose politically in Alberta. Poilievre does. Now, not that Conservatives federally have a very good record of helping Alberta out, but the expectation of Conservatives, of their federal representatives from Alberta, tends to be, I think, screw us less bad than the other guys. You don't necessarily need to help us out, but you need to leave us alone. Don't make anything worse than it is. So, I don't know. Poilievre is going to have a lot of pressure to try and buy off votes in the East, but on something this direct to Alberta, I have a feeling that he probably comes down on the side of, I don't know, no blackouts and brownouts.
I think he probably would.
And some of the Atlantic, let's not forget, some of the Atlantic provinces, 2 of the Atlantic provinces, I think.
New Brunswick and Nova Scotia both are.
They're both fighting this as well. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of waiting out, Rachel Notley. So Rachel Notley obviously lost the last election. I think she's done 5 terms now as an MLA. So she's the dean of the Alberta Legislature. She's the longest serving MLA. Led the party now through 3 elections as leader. First time winning as premier, losing in 2019, then to Jason Kenney, losing in 2023 to Danielle Smith. Speculation on her retirement began the minute the election was called at the end of May there. It's unusual for a leader who's been defeated in an election to contest another. She's now contested 2 losing elections. So the fact that she stuck around for 2023 was surprising to a lot, but she has the very solid respect of her party. But I started hearing some little whispers, and I decided I've got one pretty good source, a very high-ranking source in the NDP, and so I call this source up there and say, here's what I'm hearing. I hear Rachel Notley is going to retire this fall. What can you tell me? So let's call this source Roger. So I put out a column on this yesterday. So this person is not saying this is 100% what's happening, but this is kind of the plan around the office. So after the election at the end of May, the contracts for most of Notley's staff were set to expire in October and November so that they would expire when she retires. The idea is that Rachel Notley will retire at that time as the leader of the party, not as an MLA, but retire as leader of the party to allow an interim leader to take over, and that interim leader will see the party through the leadership race. That's I know this is not set in stone, but it is a senior source saying that's the way things are going. She wants to do that largely so that she can avoid even the appearance of favoritism or interference in the leadership race. But Nigel, it's a bit unusual though for a leader who's not being kicked out the door immediately after losing power. Stephen Harper wasn't kicked out the door. The party still liked him. He could have stayed on as they selected his successor, but he just wanted to be done. He had just lost the election. He was leaving. Rachel Notley, though, stuck around for a full 4 years after losing an election. This is a bit of an odd way to do it, though, for a leader who's not being chased out with their tail between their legs by their own party.
To the point about Rachel Notley staying on for 4 years, even after she lost, she was still the best they had.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's probably the case today. And there are plenty of precedents, if you go back a few decades, for people just staying. Mackenzie King, Laurier, John
A
A.
few decades.
MacDonald.
You're going back over a century for these
Well,
guys.
Mackenzie
You're
King
dating
was-
yourself if
was
you'd
a-
say that's a few decades.
Mackenzie King was not 100 years. Mackenzie King
No,
saw us through the.
He's
through
closer to 100 years than a few decades.
Never mind. The fact is, there is precedence for people staying on. If you want a more current one, another one who stayed on a little too long, Joe Clark. But it's
But there's not many modern examples now. You get one election.
yeah.
If you don't win, you get kicked out. Actually, in Alberta, if you win and you're conservative, you still get kicked out.
She anyway broke that trend and could continue to break it if she wanted.
Yeah.
There's a great deal of affection within that party, misplaced as it might be and wrong in the head as they most certainly are to a single person. Nevertheless, they like Rachel Notley, and she was by no means the worst that they could have offered to the voters. And if you are correct, and if your source is informed you accurately, we shall see within a few months just what the NDP can produce in the absence of Rachel Notley. It's nothing that it's only going to improve Danielle Smith's chances the next time around.
Corey, this is it's not unprecedented, but generally, even leaders being shown the door by their party sometimes manage to stick around. Jason Kenney, turfed by his own, they rigged in a rigged leadership race. He got 51%. Clearly couldn't stay, had to step down, but he didn't step down for an interim leader. They had quite a fight in the caucus over that. Many wanted him gone, have an interim leader, an interim premier. But Alison Redford, they had an interim premier, Dave Hancock. But interim leaders are even more common in opposition because you don't have to turn over the whole machinery of government. It's just really the party caucus and some party apparatus a little bit. So opposition parties that have lost an election and the leader is going, the vast majority of the time, at least in modern Canadian political history, you get an interim leader. But popular ones, she did lose an election. But, for the NDP, she did pretty damn good for the NDP. Is this surprising to you that, at least according to the source in the NDP, that she is likely to outright step down as leader and have an interim leader come in as her replacement selected?
I can believe it. It makes a lot of sense. Rachel Notley's really done her time. As you said, she's been in the legislature for a great deal of time. It was a very small rump of a party when she got on board.
When she was two ML, she was one of two MLAs.
Her and Raj Panu,
No, her and Brian Mason.
Brian Mason, yeah. So I'm going a little far
Raj
back
Panu's before
with
that.
Pam Barrett, yeah. So a two-party caucus up to forming government, putting a term in as such, and then another term as leader of the opposition. Nobody can say she didn't put in everything she could and didn't make a mark on the province. She had, a career to be celebrated as far as those who like the NDP go. Anything longer at this point is sort of dragging it out. The only hope she could have of winning the next election if she stayed would be, which is possible, I guess, if the UCP implodes. If the circumstances are the same after 4 more years, the outcome is going to be the same. And does she really want to put in now 4 more years as an opposition leader? She's tired. But she loves her party. A lot of people love her. As you said, she's not going out with a strong foot on her butt, though I suspect there's some ambitious folks in the party. Must be sort of starting to say, it's time for us to get a kick at the cat at the top job there. It would be just a well-timed spot to step aside with grace and let somebody new take over the reins. So I think it's a very believable scenario that she's going out this fall.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of talk about what life in the NDP might look like after her. So my source here, most of this part here is less juicy because a lot of it is obvious, although some names less obvious. The would-be pretenders to the crown that are kind of quietly organizing very gently. No one wants to organize too aggressively, openly, because the leader is within NDP circles. Rachel Notley's beloved. No one wants to be seen as bum rushing her out the door. That's not what's happening. But names that are kind of quietly getting ready, at least: Kathleen Ganley from Calgary, Infant Sabir, Calgary, Shannon Phillips, Lethbridge, and then Rian Hoyle and Sarah Hoffman from Edmonton, and Court Ellingson, who I think is Calgary. So some of those names are newly elected people that are supposed to be kind of bigger names in the NDP. Maybe we'll learn more about them over the next little bit, but they're pretty quiet now. They're just sitting on the opposition benches and they haven't even had a question period to try and make a mark yet. These poor people just elected. They've like gone into the legislature for a day to elect a speaker and be sworn in, and didn't even get to have a single day of combat on the floor of the legislature. I bet if I'm betting for the NDP, I mean, there's going to be different factions. There's going to be a more ideological faction. There's going to hard left, and then there'll be a more pragmatic one that says like, well, we really want to be government, and this is Alberta, so you can't go full NDP. And then there'll be the party is no longer Edmonton. It's definitely Edmonton dominant, but it would be unfair to say it's just an Edmonton party now. They've got half the seats in Calgary. How much emphasis, if you're an NDP strategist, Corey's an NDP strategist, and they're coming to you for advice. How much emphasis do you think they should put on getting a leader who's not from Edmonton?
Quite a bit. If they want to win, I mean, it's not a big pickup, but they've got Edmonton in the bag. It's the same circumstance as I said, with the last election. They need to grab a handful more Calgary seats. They're not going to make rural inroads, but if they get a moderate leader from Calgary, it is critical to their chances if they really do want to form government in the next election cycle. I mean, it's not impossible with somebody from Edmonton, but they would greatly reduce their odds. They need somebody to really build the party here.
I think that, but the split that we need to worry about is between what you referred to as the ideological, which I would actually call the nut house part of the NDP.
The OG NDP.
And the blue collar NDP, which talks the talk, but actually is all about what's in the salary packet. BC has the same split in its NDP between the industrial sector, for which Mr. Horgan was a spokesman, and for the other ones who are just crazy on the environment, crazy on the woke stuff, crazy from our perspective, I guess I should say, and have a quite unrealistic view of how money is made and bills are paid. And those are the people who can drive a province into recession and into unemployment quicker than anybody. We have both factions in the Alberta NDP. And while I quite agree with you, if they were smart, they would be looking for somebody outside Edmonton. I wouldn't put it past them to find a doctrinaire socialist, unconnected to reality, and let them lead the party, and it wouldn't matter whether they came from Edmonton or Calgary.
I think there's a few ways we could split the party. I mean, obviously, there's always geographic differences.
Yep.
The Conservatives have the same. But splitting up the NDP, I think I'd try to put them maybe into more of rough thirds. There's the union activist core, which is the old NDP. Even though a lot of unionized, non-government unionized workers do not vote NDP.
Bill McGowan for premier.
Yeah,
Exactly.
For transport minister, maybe.
If they take that clip and play it out of context, I'll just say.
Yeah. But you've got kind of the union faction, the organized union faction, not necessarily union workers, but union organizers and whatnot. You've got the kind of eco-green faction. And then, and this is becoming this last bit, I think, is an increasingly huge part of the left. It's always been, but more important lately in the NDP, I think made a lot of progress on it in the last election, particularly in Calgary, which is urban professionals. People who have higher incomes, higher levels of formal education, having come through the university worlds, dealing with kind of higher, more polite society, feel obliged to be maybe a bit more woke. But then kind of wokeness runs very strongly through both kind of the eco-green side and that urban professional side. Less so through the union side. Actual unionized workers tend to be among the least woke people I've ever met, short of farmers. But yeah, I think you've kind of got those are kind of the broad factions I'd draw, but there's also a bunch of smaller ones in between.
There's a bunch to mix. I mean, the Champagne socialists are kind of what you're describing in that sense. And But those are also the ones more inclined to be pragmatists. So if you
Yeah.
get two of those three acting together, that'll form the flavor of the party. If they can get the trade unions and that pragmatic but left-leaning group of professionals, you can get a type of party get elected. As Nigel said, though, if the loony core at the base gets somebody in there as leader and that moves in that direction, though, that's fine. But they're going to be in opposition for quite some time.
Yeah, I think Shannon Phillips is someone to watch because the NDP, like all parties, but the NDP especially in Alberta, they're very suspicious of newcomers. Have you paid your dues? Are you just here because the NDP is a big deal? Because after 2015, there was a bunch of liberals who came in. And a lot of the pragmatists in the NDP were like, great, well, we're absorbing the liberals. Come on in to the big left progressive tent. But some of the New Democrats were like, we were enemies yesterday. The NDP and liberals were blood enemies for a long time. You screwed us in 93, blah, 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 blah. How welcoming are they going to be to an outsider? Let's say Nenshi. We view Nenshi as this lefty, moderate lefty, not totally loony, but kind of out there and blah, blah, blah. A lot of New Democrats I talk to, they don't view him as the dream candidate that we might think. They think, he hasn't been a party member. He hasn't paid his dues.
He has not sold the socialist worker on the street corner copy by copy to passers-by.
Exactly. But someone who does have that stuff and is not from Edmonton is Shannon Phillips. She's a true believer. She used to work with, was it Mike Hudima?
Oh,
The crazy
Greenpeace,
Greenpeace extremist. And while she's really tough on camera, she's actually fairly pleasant and personable, believe it or not, just in person. She's actually fairly nice. But she's got the base. The base of the NDP likes her. She's hardcore left, green, but she's not from Edmonton. She's from Lethbridge. And Lethbridge on paper, that's more country than Calgary.
Well, and that's it. They've got a lot of questions to answer, and that's why the scenario you're talking about, it's going to be an important leadership race if and when it happens. And if it doesn't have the former leader in there stirring with it or meddling with it, because the party's going to have to find itself. They have a few paths to take and a few routes. And Notley is a smart pragmatist. So if she cares for the party, she'll step aside and let them.
I think our next office pool is going to be for the NDP leadership. I'm going to put my early bet right now, without knowing who the candidates are, my early bet. So I should get the best odds for it because I don't even know who's going to be playing on the field. But I'm putting Shannon Phillips as next leader of the NDP. You heard it here first. Speaking of crazy green eco nut stuff, actually, I'm coming right back to Gilbo, whatever we call him. Ottawa's ban on usable compostable bags. So I was saying at the top of the show, those of you outside of Alberta might not even know what we're talking about. It's an Alberta company, Calgary-based company that did this. Ottawa says, we're going to ban single-use plastics, including plastic bags at the grocery store that we love. And this Calgary company comes up with compostable bags that feel like they're almost like they tear a little easier than the plastic bags, but they're decent. Even me, I was like, I'm okay with these. This is fine. But they must be too good because Ottawa is banning them with plastic bags. I haven't known what to call these. I finally came up with a name for them today because compostable plastic bags. Well, they're not plastic. They're just almost as good as plastic. Do we call them just compostable bags? Well, there's a lot of compostable bags, including the crappy paper bags that we used to be told to stop using because we're killing trees. So I'm just calling them usable plastic bag, usable compostable bags, or maybe we'll call them non-crap compostable bags. Either way, Ottawa is banning them. And they haven't really given much of a reason why, saying no exceptions to plastic-like products. And let's start with you, Corey. We were saying before, we were talking off the air, Ottawa could have claimed this as a great victory, actually, because they could have claimed, and I would have had to grit my teeth and grudgingly admit they were right, that by saying we're banning plastic bags at the grocery store, they forced and spurred innovation that created this incredible new product that has the potential to be a global leader in reducing single-use plastics.
Whole new Canadian product.
Yeah, Ottawa could have said, we did that because our plastic bags ban, we forced the innovation that created this product. Instead, they've taken the opposite approach and said, no, stop your damned innovation. Those plastic bags are too convenient and enjoyable for a shopper's experience. We're banning them too. What? I'm not just playing flummoxed. I'm not just playing Mr. Magoo. I don't understand why they're banning it. Can you
Part of it, you got to
do your
go
best
back.
mind meld with
You
Jill
got
Bowe
to
here?
go back to why they're banning plastic bags in the first place. As a percentage of landfill use or actual pollution, those thin microplastic bags, next to nothing. They were not a large part of the problem. The problem with them is they're visible. When they get loose, they get stuck on the fence. They go tumbling across the highway. They look ugly. You see them. This is virtue signaling. This isn't about fixing the environment. This is a control.
We all hate seeing them when they get stuck on a fence or a tree. It is
And
ugly.
even the compostable ones will stick on the tree and get stuck on the fence. So the next year they'll have degraded and be gone.
Yeah.
But they'll have been seen. So I think that's part of it. The damage they've done, as you said, this could have been such a win. I mean, it was great. They spurred innovation. Now they've done the opposite. They've said, don't even try. We'll just keep moving the goalposts. Just ban whatever we're banning, and there's no substitute. It's ridiculous, and it's really exposed them for the intractable ideologues they are. You can't reason with them.
Nigel, I'm just at a lost words. I don't know why they're doing this. I don't get it. Is it ideology, or is it just they? I try to assume the best of motives in people, even if they're bad motives. I try to be the most charitable I can, but I've had a hard time empathizing in this case about what they're thinking. The best I can come up with, and I'm probably wrong, the best I can come up with is that, kind of like COVID, even when we knew the masks did nothing, the government thought it was important that we wear masks because it was a sign of social solidarity, that you're demonstrating that we're in this together. It's now a social activity. And that banning plastic bags, even compostable bags that just have the convenience and feel of plastic, it'll make us feel better about ourselves because it's such a pain in the ass to carry the groceries to and from the truck anymore, from the grocery store into the house. That this is an exercise in social solidarity. That's the best I can come up with, but even that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, it's not really an exercise in social solidarity when you don't have the product in your hand. I have to ask, I wonder whether these things would be banned if they were being made in Stephen Guilbeault's riding. That is a question.
They happen to be made in Calgary, which is an issue.
I noticed that. But I will also say that for once, this is an aspect of politics that I can afford to ignore. My wife takes bags with her. She takes these plastic ones that they've been giving away. They've used them 3 dozen times. You take a shopping bag. I don't really care whether they offer me paper bags or plastic bags. She's got a bag with her. End of problem. Maybe it's not such a big deal.
I can't do it.
You can't do it?
No, I can't do it for 2 reasons. 1, I'm way too forgetful and disorganized. 2, because Ottawa wants me to do it. I can't do it. Because,
So another intractable ideologue.
so like, even if
Did you hear him say he was organized?
Yeah.
I have managed to, by sheer force of will, I've made myself organized to run this company, but it takes me to my breaking point every day. I've only got so many bits of RAM in my computer, and taking cloth reusable bags to the grocery store is just, it's beyond my capacity. Can't do it. Well, we're gonna have to wrap up there. We're out of time, but I want to leave all of you listeners, viewers, the little idea for a little micro anarchy, a little sliver of civil disobedience. I believe in recycling, although I know there's a bunch of issues. Mostly just gets packaged and sits in a warehouse somewhere until we can ship it overseas to get recycled in a decade or 2. But in general, I believe in recycling. I believe in compost. I've been composting long before some damn city politicians made me pay a bunch of money for a green cart in front of my house. I've been recycling for generations. Like I just grew up, I've been composting for generations. Free dirt. Who doesn't like free dirt for your garden? I believe in these things, but I'm more or less stopping now. Until Ottawa reverses its ban on good compostable grocery bags, I encourage you on garbage day, take some compost, put it in the garbage. Take some recycle, put it in the garbage. Put a little garbage over top so the garbage man and the garbage bureaucrats can't see it because they're not going to rifle through it to the bottom. Start putting your compost and your recycle in the garbage can temporarily, hopefully, until Ottawa reverses this madness. I still take paper straws and then I put them but I put them in the garbage. When I go to a restaurant, I bring my plastic straw with me. And yeah, I know I sound insane. I probably am a little crazy, but I bring a plastic straw with me, but I still accept the paper straw so I can put it in the garbage. Little micro acts of anarchy.
Flag of revolution is hoisted aloft.
Yes.
Don't tread on me, eh?
Come and
Bold act of revolution here, eh?
Come and get it. My garbage.
Come and take it. Okay. Well, that's enough for now. Before we let you go, though, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandard.news right now and become a member today. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. We need you to support the work we do. The Western Standard is Western Canada's largest online news organization now, and by far leading in Alberta. We need your support. We are not taking the federal government's media bailouts. They are passing legislation, have passed legislation censoring us from Facebook and from Google. We need your support. So make sure you get on there, become a member, support the work we do so that we're supporting you. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.